Dave Life with DLTV News. Former President Donald Trump has been found guilty on 34 felonies related to falsification of business records.
We're seeing that on screen, guilty. It's count 28, guilty. Those are the first 28 felony counts here as read by the jury. Count 29, guilty. Count 30, guilty. Count 31, guilty. Count 32, guilty. Count 33 and 34, guilty. That is Donald J. Trump, defendant in New York versus Donald Trump, found guilty on all 34 felony counts. That is the verdict here in this case.
Donald Trump was charged with 34 counts of falsification of business records in the first degree in the state of New York. That is a felony. He was arraigned last year and he was found guilty just yesterday. A lot of people have asked, what actually was the former president convicted of? Well, we have some details here that I'm going to read, and then we can bring in our analyst to help us understand. According to CBS News, former President Donald Trump's conviction in New York stems from $130,000 in hush money, a payment that was made by his attorney, Michael Cohen, to adult film star Stormy Daniels. This payment was made days before the election in 2016. Prosecutors said that this hush money was paid in order to keep voters in the dark about Daniels' allegation that she had sex with Trump years earlier, which he denies. The actual charges that Trump faced were far less salacious and dealt with the comparatively mundane paperwork that was generated when he reimbursed Cohen for payment. In 2017, Cohen and Weissenberg, an executive at the Trump Organization, they reached an agreement on how Cohen would be repaid for the $130,000 that he sent to Daniels in exchange for her silence. Weisenberg detailed the calculations on a handwritten note that was shown to the jury at the trial. DaveLifeTV News obtained a copy of the statement, and it reads as follows. Account statement between the period of October 26th and October 31st, 2016. Total deposits and credits are $131,000. Total withdrawals are $130,035. Ending balance $965. And you can see here that there is a $130,000 wire to Keith M. Davidson and Associates. And there's a $35 fee. And you can see Weissenberg's notes, which shows that there's $130,000, which is being moved. And then there was something added for Redfinch Tech Services for $50,000. This was shown in court, and it is proof that there was a payment that was wired from Trump's account and attorneys, and it's through Weissenberg, and it's for possibly the hush money. Cohen was to be paid in a series of $35,000 payments over the course of 2017. The first check was for $70,000, covering 2 months. He sent an invoice to the Trump Organization for each check, portraying the payment as his retainer. Every time he was paid, a bookkeeper generated a record for his company's files, and it was shown as a legal expense. So each of these 34 charges against Trump corresponded to a check, invoice, and a voucher generated to reimburse Cohen. To help us understand the ins and outs of this case, we have DaveLifeTV News legal contributor Kara Rhymes with Sarah. Kara, come on to the stage and help us discuss this.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, as always.
Thanks for joining. Can you break down, Kara, help us in layman's terms, for those of us that are not attorneys, for those of us that are not accountants, help us understand what Trump was actually found guilty of, what this means for his potential candidacy, and what this means going forward, just having a former president guilty of a felony.
So this is definitely a case of first impression for American politics. No other president even had to endure a criminal trial. No other president, by extension, was found guilty. Donald J. Trump was found guilty of 34 individual counts of falsifying business records, which means he altered business records in some way 34 different times. And the state of New York put on a case, and the jury decided that he was guilty of each and every single count. Now, in the state of New York, falsifying business records is a Class E felony. Class E felonies are non-violent felonies. So nothing including violence against another person or property, right? What's interesting about Class E felonies is that you can, by agreement with the prosecutor's office or via some sort of appellate process, receive a misdemeanor sentence. A misdemeanor sentence is one that is up to 365 days. But he was found guilty presently of 34 individual counts of falsifying business records in the state of New York. Now, the trial began on April 15th with jury selection. Less than half of the people that were called in for jury duty indicated that they could be impartial. And so those people were immediately dismissed. But also on that day, Trump's legal team had a huge victory where Judge Merchan ruled that the infamous, my apologies, Access Hollywood tape could not be played in court. Now, when you were having
Is that the tape where he said you can do whatever you want? You can grab them by the genitals.
I believe
Was that
so.
the tape?
I think
Okay,
so. I have
that's what I remember. Access Hollywood, where look, this is a grown-up show. The former president said you can do anything you want. You can get a woman to like you. You can grab her by the vagina, and he was elected, and it was a big scandal. So they said that could not be
played in
into
court.
his evidence. Okay,
I don't remember
because
which
this is
one.
related to fraud, not something else.
Correct.
You said that there were jurors that were automatically, I guess, disqualified. Why was that?
So part of the voir dire process in any sort of trial involving a jury, meaning not just with a judge for a bench trial, they go through a series of questions. And one of the standard questions is if the potential juror can in fact be impartial. And especially in a case with a public figure, a celebrity, or anything of that nature where people have preconceived thoughts or notions about them, each side is going to ask, right?
Okay.
Despite what you have heard or what you know about this particular defendant or this particular party, can you in fact be impartial? And less than half of the people indicated that they could be impartial.
Wow, less than half. So
Less than half.
what I know about the jury, and then I'll let you continue your analysis. I heard that the jurors were from New York, that the foreperson was Irish. He was an Irish immigrant from Ireland. And that there were a few lawyers that were a part of the jury, and that the jury heard evidence for up to 6 weeks before they gave their sentencing.
So the jury pool is comprised of people in the local community, typically where the court is held, where the case is being held. In certain circumstances, they may move the case to a different courthouse for whatever reason, similar to what happened in the famous O.J. Simpson trial. But it is comprised of people in the local community, DMV records, voter registration, a number of things. But in this case, less than half of the people indicated that they could be impartial. Now, of those jurors that were in fact impaneled, meaning they were allowed to be on the jury, there were a few that had negative thoughts and opinions about former President Trump, but then also indicated that they could be impartial. And after using all of their challenges, Trump's legal team was unable to get those people kicked off the jury. So by April 18th, there was an announcement that they had their jury and that they were impaneled, meaning these are the people, including the alternates, that will be listening to this case throughout the duration of the time. Now, opening statements happened the following Monday, April 22nd, and where both sides laid out an outline of their argument to the jury, setting up the rest of the trial before prosecutors called their first witness, who was AMI CEO David Pecker. It's important to note that this is typically how criminal trials work. The state puts on their case first after opening statements, and then the defense gets a chance to put on their case if they so choose. Now, April 30th is when the jury was called in. But before they were called in, Judge Merchan ruled that former Donald Trump violated a gag order and fined him $9,000. So a gag order is something that a judge will issue indicating what either party cannot say or do during the duration of the trial. And it was found that Trump violated that. And so he was fined $9,000. Next, we had Cohen's former banker, Gary Farrow, and he walked the jury how Michael Cohen opened an account to send money to Stormy Daniels' attorney before attorney Keith Davidson, who represented both Karen McDougal and Daniels, took the stand. And I'm not going to go through each of the individual witnesses that took the stand because the trial was about 6 weeks long. In the middle of May, the 13th, the 14th, the 16th, and the 20th, Cohen was on the stand, and he admitted that he stole $60,000 from the Trump organization. Also, Cohen tied Trump to Daniels' hush money payment and reimbursement, which is a huge admission from Cohen that I would say was a turning point in the trial that kind of turned it against Donald Trump being found not guilty. So,
Correct. I'm seeing here that prosecutors allege that Trump knew the payments were to reimburse Cohen for hush money.
yes,
Trump was aware.
that's a huge portion of him being found guilty, because it's one thing if misdeeds were done without his knowledge or instruction, but showing that he knew and it was at his direction is a completely different conversation. But on cross-examined, Trump's legal team tried to use Cohen's own words to discredit him. They had a heated confrontation over a key phone call, which defense argued that Cohen did not talk to Trump about the Daniels payment and instead talked to Trump's bodyguard. And I don't know how many people have engaged with an attorney, but it's not usual for your attorney to have a conversation with your bodyguard, especially about something so important.
So one question is asked as to why felony charges were brought up against him. And it says, under New York law, falsification of business records is a crime when the records are altered with an intent to defraud. To be charged as a felony, prosecutors must show that the offender intended to commit another crime or aid or conceal another crime when falsifying the records. Were you surprised that they charged him with 34 felonies as opposed to 34 misdemeanors?
No. Unfortunately for him, when you are a celebrity or a public figure, oftentimes they will pick a more severe charge to charge you with to make an example of you. So here in the United States, part of the criminal justice system isn't just to help create justice for victims, but it's to deter others from committing similar acts, right? So if someone was considering doing something like this, and they see this man was charged with 34 felonies and in fact convicted, that's a different effect than just misdemeanors, right? So this case is just going to go viral by the very nature of the defendant involved. And so they're likely to bring the more severe charges that they think they can be successful with. So it's a lot easier to agree to a lesser charge of a misdemeanor sentence.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go the other way. So if I charge you with a misdemeanor, I can't then threaten you with felony time.
You can't trump it up to a felony.
See what you did.
Pun intended. Hey, I have a question, Kara. So Donald Trump is the first former president to be convicted of a felony, and he's also in contention to be the GOP candidate. So sentencing for his for the verdict is on July 11th, and the GOP convention is just 4 days later on July 15th. How does this affect the potential for him to be the candidate for the Republican Party?
I hate to say it, but I don't think it has much of any bearing on his ability for the GOP to name him as their choice for nominee. His base is, they're very dedicated. They are committed to the extent that how he behaves, what he says does not seem to deter them. So that's a little frightening. I think when this country was founded, this was not something that our founding fathers had in mind as something that would ever happen. And unfortunately, there's somewhat of a loophole present to allow it to proceed.
Okay, so I have one more question. How much time is Trump looking at for 34 felonies? And will the time be concurrent? Will it be sequential?
So that's a very good question. And it depends on how the judge determines to sentence him. So I don't have an answer for that. Likely, in this case, at least here in the state of Georgia, it wouldn't likely be sequential. It would be concurrent, meaning all of the sentences would be running at the same time. So although he might have 34 1 year or more sentences, he would only be in prison for whichever count has the maximum time. So let's say 33 of them, he gets sentenced to 1 year, and then one of them, he gets sentenced to 5. It wouldn't be 5 + 1. It would likely just be 5, and he would more likely serve maybe 70% of that time. But because this is a non-violent felony, it is a good chance that he could be sentenced as if it were a misdemeanor. Right? He could also, there's also an appeals process, which is actually pretty lengthy. So the typical appeals process for a convicted felon in the state of New York can take almost a year or more. So his legal team, meaning former President Trump, could try and delay the process further after his felony convictions that took place last Thursday. Under New York law, any appeal of a verdict comes after sentencing, and his sentencing date is currently set for July 11th. Trump has 30 days after that time to file a notice of appeal with the court. Once the notice is filed, his legal team typically will have 6 months to complete procedural requirements like filing their appellate arguments, as well as filing other documents like the trial transcripts. Now, in an appeals process, it's not just, I don't think the verdict was right. You have to have a legal reason of something that took place in court saying that the judge acted in an improper way that improperly prejudiced you and would have resulted in a different outcome. So people think you can just file an appeal because you're unhappy. It's not quite like that. So once the appeal is fully submitted by his team, then the attorneys for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office would likely be given approximately 30 days to file a response. I do believe that they would be able to petition the court for additional time because of the length of the underlying trial. So after the state, meaning the prosecutor's office, files their response, Trump's legal team will have one more opportunity to submit a brief in response to what the prosecution has filed. Now, in New York State, it is a five-judge panel for the appellate division, and then they will hear oral arguments from both sides and issue a written decision, which could take months. Unfortunately, because we have an election coming up, the appellate division in New York State is not subject to a deadline. So how long that might take, we're kind of at their mercy, unfortunately.
So he could literally win the election and still have ongoing appeals from this case.
Yes. And this is what I kind of wanted to discuss during Roundtable, and I didn't have time, unfortunately. But what is really concerning is there are people, most of the people with means, who are financially tied to Trump in one way or another. And I could see a world where, because now with the conviction, his stocks have reportedly taken a dive, that they would want to double down on their investment to try and ensure that he has an opportunity to run for office again. So this is why I keep saying we need to stop focusing on, oh, he got convicted. That's checkers.
Well, I don't know if you've heard, but in the 24 hours since the conviction, the Trump organization, his candidacy, they've raised $53 million. So this is very real. He's still a viable candidate. People still want to see him reelected. His base is empowered and emboldened. And we can get into reactions on the next episode, but there were many reactions in New York and other places with his conviction. So I think you're absolutely right. This is interesting how this is going to play out, but his candidacy is not over by any means.
In fact, I would argue, and this is my personal opinion, that his conviction has made him a more attractive candidate because now they feel attacked, his base. Now he's the underdog. In what world is a billionaire an underdog? I'm confused. So it's important for us to understand that if the lower appeals court ultimately rejects his appeal, meaning upholds his convictions, upholding the jury's verdict, former President Trump can still take it to the Court of Appeals in New York, which is the highest court. So even if he doesn't win at the lower appellate court, he has another opportunity. Now, what's notable is the appellate court in New York, the Court of Appeals, has to decide whether or not they're going to consider his case. It's not required to even hear it. So if they do, if he's not victorious on his first appeal, and he decides to take it up one level. And if they decide to consider his case, then it's a similar lengthy briefing process, which would begin before a panel of judges, and they would eventually hear arguments and deliver a written decision, likely months after arguments. And that would dovetail, overlap with when our next president should in fact be in office. So these are very high stakes. So when I keep telling people stop celebrating over these convictions, because it is highly unlikely that he would see the inside of a prison cell. Is it possible? Yes. I mean, 10 years ago, I would have told you none of this was possible. Yet here we are.
Right. So as we were saying, his candidacy is far from over. And I really appreciate your legal analysis of the case. So please come back and keep us informed.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, everybody. That's Kara Rhymes with Sarah from Next Steps Real Estate. And she is our legal contributor for DaveLifeTV News. So make sure you guys follow her at Next Steps Real Estate. Thanks, Kara.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching DaveLifeTV News. Keep it locked on DaveLifeTV for all of your updates and the latest when it comes to Trump and other cases. Make sure you subscribe and follow. We appreciate you. Peace.